What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
This is the What Really Happened radio show. I'm your host, Michael Rivero. It is Thursday, September 21st, 2017. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, and let's get into the news here. Obviously, at this point, as we move further and further away from Trump's UN speech, more and more people seem to be willing to come on out with expressions of their unhappiness, upset, with what he said. And at this point, everyone has pretty much concluded that all of Trump's campaign promises last year of the United States no longer being the policeman of the world, pulling back from all these interventions, that's all gone away. Trump is a captive of the deep state, the CIA, the military-industrial complex, what have you, and Trump has now fallen in line with continued interventionism around the world. And of course, obviously, also his subservience to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is going to get ready to send more Americans off to make war on Israel's enemies that have not done anything to us. And there is really the issue. Again, Iran has not done anything to the United States of America. Neither did Iraq, neither did Libya, neither did Yemen, neither did Somalia. These are all unprovoked, outright aggressions on the part of the United States of America, and it looks like it's continuing. Now, back in 2002, Bush used his United Nations speech to argue for the action against Iraq, which was based on all these lies about weapons of mass destruction, and it looks like Trump is just going down that same pattern, arguing for war against Iran, again, with lies and myths about weapons of mass destruction. And again, the Aiea has certified that Iran is totally in compliance with the P5+1. It's just Israel's out there saying, oh, no, we know Iran still has a secret nuclear weapon program. We absolutely, and we tried to tell the Aiea, but they wouldn't listen to us, probably because Israel's been lying about Iran nuclear weapon for close to 30 years now. It's like every 2 months, Iran is just 2 weeks away from a nuclear bomb. They've been saying that for almost 30 years, and it hasn't happened. And don't forget, when Israel bombed the Osirak power station in Iraq, they made the same claim. They're building bombs in the basement. And following the invasion of Iraq, experts, analysts, inspectors took a look at the remains of the Osirak reactor, and all they found was a power station. There was no secret bomb factory in the basement, the way Israel has down in Dimona. And so basically, more and more people are realizing that what Trump has announced at the United Nations is the official descent of the United States of America into outright barbarism. And they're trying to sell the idea that war and genocide are cool and acceptable, because that's what Donald Trump is talking about. When he's talking about totally destroying North Korea, he's advocating the genocide of an entire people. And a lot of the world's leaders are very upset about that, and not just the outside world. Apparently, 3 organizations, MoveOn.org, Credo Action, and Win Without War, issued a joint statement today saying this statement is a complete failure. That Trump's speech is a complete failure. It's just bellicosity and aggression, just laid bare. Now, the president of the Czech Republic is out there saying that Trump is out there acting like he's a teacher handing out grades. And the United Nations is supposed to be a meeting of equals, leaders of nations. And Donald Trump is acting like this is all about masters and students. And that President of the United States of America makes him master of the world, and no, it doesn't. I'm sure there's a lot of other world leaders who would say, no, actually, it doesn't here. And more people are coming on out and saying, basically, the reality is the United States is the biggest rogue state. And it's constantly accusing others of what the United States has been doing. Oh, they're using torture. No, the U.S. was. Oh, they've got weapons of mass destruction. No, the U.S. does. Oh, they're using chemical weapons. No, the U.S. has been doing that. They're projecting their sins onto the designated enemy to justify continued aggression. And Dan Kovalik is saying he doesn't think it's appropriate to speak about defending the interest of just one particular nation at the United Nations. It's supposed to be finding a joint way forward to peace and prosperity. Iran's President Hassan Rouhani has basically lashed out saying Donald Trump is ignorant and spiteful, and basically saying it was full of false information and groundless allegations against the Iranian nation. And he's absolutely true. They're still out there pushing this idea that Iran might have nuclear weapons. They might somewhere hidden. Israel says they've got hidden nuclear weapons. We have to listen to Israel here. It's entirely possible they could have it. Yeah, they could also possibly maybe have a Death Star. But you don't go bombing other countries on the possibility of what they might have when you don't have a single scrap of evidence about it. That's like me saying, I'm convinced my neighbor is coveting my wife. I don't have any proof of it, but because I suspect that it might be the case, that gives me a right to go on out and shoot him. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Now, more and more countries are coming forward to say they're perfectly happy with the existing Iranian nuclear deal. Of course, Israel's not happy about it. And Macron is saying maybe it should be renegotiated, but everybody else in the European Union is saying we are not renegotiating the Iran nuclear deal. We're very, very happy with the way it is. This is an agreement that prevented a nuclear program and potentially prevented a military intervention. But see, there's the object lesson again. Even though Iran is in compliance, even though Iran has surrendered their nuclear weapons program, the U.S. is still going after them. And everybody is aware of it. China is now on board, calling for support for the Iran nuclear deal. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on Wednesday said that everybody needs to get behind that Iran nuclear deal and not let it be destroyed. Russia's Sergei Lavrov is reaffirming Russia's commitment to the existing P5+1 deal. And there's even dissension about it here in the United States. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is fully on board with keeping the existing deal. But, of course, Nikki Haley is out there saying, no, we've got to get rid of it. We have to move forward. We've got wars to fight. Now, the latest word coming on out of Washington, D.C. is that Trump is going to decertify the Iran deal. He is going to declare that Iran is not in compliance with the deal and then dump the decision about whether to pull out of the deal onto Congress. So he can duck the blame if this really goes south here. And this is coming out of NBC News, citing 4 different sources, that Trump is going to shift the decision whether or not to pull out of the P5+1 to Congress. And meantime, he's still going to be pushing the European powers to agree to renegotiate parts of the agreement, adding in limits on missiles and various other weapons to make sure that Iran is really easy to invade when the time comes here. Congress is starting to push back, especially the Democrats, saying they have seen absolutely no evidence that Iran has violated the nuclear deal. And again, the IAEA has been keeping watch on Iran, and they're saying there's nothing there. This is a replay of Iraq all over again. They've got weapons of mass destruction. We can't find any evidence of, well, just take it from us. They've got weapons of mass destruction. And as it turned out, Iraq didn't have them. Even the head of the U.S. Strategic Command, Chief General John Hyten, is saying that as far as they can tell, Iran is fully complying with the terms of the deal. Now, here is where Donald Trump or his advisors aren't thinking very clearly. Because if Donald Trump makes good on his threat to pull out of the P5+1 agreement with Iran, how is he going to be able to convince North Korea that America will honor any commitments made if North Korea surrenders their nuclear weapons? You can't do it. You can't break all these agreements and then go to another country and say, we promise we'll do this if you surrender your nuclear weapons. It's not going to work. It's absolutely not going to work. Now, Trump also took a moment to tear into Cuba about how evil they are, how we need to keep the... Okay, we seem to have lost... Are we still on the air? Okay, we're still on. Okay, I was getting strange noises in my headset. All right, so anyway, back to the thing here. Trump was talking about Cuba and maintaining the embargo there. Most of the world leaders are out there saying, we support Cuba. This embargo has gone on long enough. And remember, there's this whole thing about, oh, the U.S. diplomats are under attack. Cuba's doing things to them with sound waves. And as we pointed out yesterday, there's no reason for the Cuban government to do that. Cuba wants normalized relations. Cuba has wanted normal relations with the United States all the way back to when Castro took power. So they're not going to do anything to the diplomats. If something indeed was actually happening, and we're not sure it was, given the climate of lying that's coming out of the U.S. government, then it wasn't from the Cuban government. But Trump's out there saying we've got to keep the blockade, and the rest of the world is saying, no, this has gone on way, way too long. Everybody who was in power and authority back then, they're all gone. They're retired. Most of them are dead. This is just the U.S. acting like a spoiled brat, keeping the embargo around Cuba just to prove that they can. Now, over at the Daily Beast, which I used to have a lot of respect for, they just ran an article saying that Russia organized all the pro-Trump rallies. You remember those huge rallies, sports venues filled to overflowing, standing room only, compared to Hillary's little tiny gatherings where she'd get 20, 30, 40 people, and they'd throw her campaign staff in there to make it look like the crowd was larger. Well, Daily Beast is now claiming that Russia used a Facebook page to get all those people to show up for Donald Trump. Only they have no sources and no evidence whatsoever. It's back to the Russia bashing nonstop all the time. And it's frankly getting very, very tiresome. And they're still out there trying to say, oh, Russia tampered with our election. Russia tampered with our election. Well, how about the FBI? Because with the revelation that the FBI was tapping Trump's campaign staff both before and after the election, it looks like maybe the meddling in the election came from a domestic source. Came from Obama on behalf of Hillary, and Russia had nothing to do with it. And even the Wall Street Journal is out there saying there's an issue there about how much meddling the FBI did in the election. By the way, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have yet to be contacted by Robert Mueller or the Senate in connection with this Russia probe. They're not really looking at the evidence. They're trying to craft a case out of thin air. Now, Hillary Clinton is still out there on her total denial tour, and her latest blame game is that women only voted for Donald Trump because their husbands told them to. See, one of the real surprise outcomes of last year's election were how many women voted for Donald Trump. And Hillary just assumed that women would vote for her because she's a woman. It just makes perfect sense in the liberal mind here. And a lot of women voted for Donald Trump. And now she's out there saying, well, they're just weak. They're just weak. Their husbands told them to vote for Trump, and they just went ahead and did it. And that's why I got cheated out of the White House. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. By the way, Amazon is still censoring all negative reviews of Hillary Clinton's book. Amazon has received an F rating from FakeSpot, which is the company that analyzes Amazon reviews for fraud. And apparently there's a lot of it going on. I mean, her book is already on clearance shelves. Let's take a phone call. Tom in Connecticut. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Mike. The last couple days I've heard some comments about Sandy Hook. Evidently you had a guest. My whole conundrum with this is I live about 10 miles from Sandy Hook.
Yeah.
My wife is a prominent physician in the area. Her office manager had a son that worked in the school system. There are things that I have heard from people that I trust. They went to funerals. They know people who died.
Uh-huh.
I don't know what to do with that information. Look, I'm all on Oklahoma City bombings, 9/11, all the way down the line. But this one I got a hard time processing.
Well, we know that Wolfgang Halbig has accumulated a tremendous amount of evidence. There's a question as to whether the school was even still an active school at the time. We know that, strangely enough, all those parents who were claiming that they lost children, their mortgages got paid off rather mysteriously. And at this point, prudence demands that we assume deception on the part of the government until it's proven otherwise. The burden of proof is on the government to prove anything that they're telling to us, and they've come up really short on this. Anyway, Tom, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and get back to the news of the day here. Now, as you know, there was actually an indictment handed down against Hillary Clinton all the way back in the Whitewater scandal. And it was sealed. And a lot of people have been saying, don't we have a right to know what it was she was accused of? And so far, the National Archives has been arguing that her indictment ought to be kept secret because of Clinton's personal privacy. Now, this is the first time I've ever understood somebody who's accused of a crime allowed to hide that accusation from the public on the principle of privacy. But then when Alan Favish got his Freedom of Information Act lawsuit to the Supreme Court over the crime scene photos of Vincent Foster to confirm that there was, in fact, a second bullet wound on the body, the Supreme Court ruled against him, saying that dead people have a right to privacy. I mean, that's how absurd this stuff was definitely going to get. Well, Judicial Watch has sued for these documents, and they're finally going to get their day in court on Friday, and Judicial Watch does a lot of really good work. I have to tell you, my prediction is they will not get these documents because they get dangerously close to the laundering of the drug money out of the CIA's Iran-Contra gun and drug running down to Nicaragua. So I don't think they're going to get it because that is the rotted core of our narcocracy, and everybody's going to agree to protect that to keep their own jobs here. All right, let's take another phone call. James in Atlanta, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I wanted to ask about Equifax. Do you know if there's any kind of stress test that anybody's doing to see if these big agencies that collect all this data can be hacked into? I mean, stress tests that they do with lenders to see what their firewalls are?
Well, they should be. The problem is, and I'm going to be talking about this more in the third hour, is we're seeing a pattern of reckless disregard for security by the owners of these giant servers. And so if you'll stay tuned to the third hour, we're going to get into that in quite a bit of detail because there's a lot of new information there, okay?
Just one more question. People keep saying meddling. That's an old kind of an old phrase. Is that a way they can keep repeating that without actually proving that that's a crime? Because that just seems like a prank or something when they keep saying meddling.
Well, they're saying meddling because it's got a negative connotation that the meddlers shouldn't be there, which they shouldn't. But it obscures the fact that the U.S. meddles in foreign elections all the time. And again, as the Wall Street Journal points out, let's stop worrying about Russia and find out how much meddling in the election was going on inside our own country, between the FBI bugging the Trump campaign, between Hillary stealing the nomination from Bernie Sanders, and all of the evidence of massive election fraud that is surfacing in front of this Trump's Commission on Election Integrity. Millions of illegals voted. Up in New Hampshire, we have that new revelation about people from Massachusetts were driving up claiming that they'd moved to New Hampshire to vote for Hillary Clinton, and they never really did. So, I think they're trying to keep the focus on Russia because they're desperate not to have the American people realize that our election system is a complete joke. It is insecure. It is designed to facilitate and then conceal election fraud, and we need a new election system that makes it as hard as possible to cheat the election and makes it very easy to detect when it has happened, the exact inverse of the system that we have right now. Okay?
It just seems like a buzzword that somebody came up with to cover for Russia, because I don't remember hearing that term in any
It's a
movies
good
or
word. Well,
anything
they're not covering for Russia. There's no evidence that Russia had anything to do with any of this stuff. Like I said, it's a misdirection to keep the focus on Russia so it doesn't come back to whether Hillary Clinton was trying to steal the election or not, which is a foregone conclusion. James, we got to let you go. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go back to the phones. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Hey, I watched Lavrov's speech today, and he gets 4 stars. That would be one Pinocchio, right?
Well, no. Pinocchio's when you're lying, and the more you lie, the more Pinocchios you get.
So he gets no Pinocchios, 5 stars.
Okay.
Yeah, because I made a mistake the other day. I said Trump gets 5 Pinocchios because I didn't like his speech at all. And Rabbani's got 5 stars and no Pinocchios because he was a great speaker. But, Mike, you know, I noticed Lavrov's speech, he brought up the the multipolar world versus the unipolar world, and he says plain and simply, you're going to make it worse for yourself if you continue this arrogance, basically, because it's not going to stop this multipolar world from coming about.
No, it isn't.
And I thought that was a great thing he said, because that's true, Hey, Mike, did you hear a report that Russia killed 650 jihadists, and they tried to ambush like MPs, Russian MPs, and that got pushed back. And they found like all this hydrogen peroxide in big blue tubs when ISIS left an area in Deir ez-Zor, and it was all in English, the hydrogen peroxide, big blue 50-gallon drums, Mike, of hydrogen peroxide, which is like, obviously it's dangerous.
Well, it's dangerous in its fully anhydrous form, but I mean, you buy hydrogen peroxide at the drugstore to disinfect cuts and stuff with. I think it may have been something else like hydrogen sulfide. But the gist of the story, we were going to cover this a little later today, but the gist of the story is that the jihadis wanted to capture these 29 Russian soldiers and put them on public display as part of a psychological campaign to try and get Russia to pull back, and it failed miserably. These 29 Russians held out for several hours until the Spetsnaz showed up, and of course the Spetsnaz are real bad dudes, and the number I heard was they killed 850 of the jihadis and just absolutely destroyed the area, chased them into the desert, and just hunted them all down. So it was a major, major defeat.
Hey, Mike, there was a great video when Russia used the Caliber cruise missiles, and you see the video, which they use GoPros, so it's a lot cheaper than what the U.S. military spends on their equipment, and it gets the same job done because it showed militants moving in and out of this, like, building with, like, a truck next to it, either moving explosive weapon, and it got directly squished, man. I was like, all right. It was like a direct hit. So anybody who thinks Russia don't have state-of-the-art missiles, they're 20 years ahead on us with missile tech. That's all I want to say. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, well, they've been developing cost-effective weapons is what they're doing, and the U.S. just wastes all this money to make the defense contractors rich. All right, we're going to switch over to Bill in Pennsylvania, and Bill, I may have to take you through the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I wanted to reflect on a comment that you made yesterday on yesterday's show about, the different conquest of war that United States is like invading different countries for like the last 20 years, Iraq, Libya, so on and so on. The only people that really benefit from war are the bankers. And, I just hope, sooner than later, at least in my lifetime, in our lifetime, I'm at the same age as you are, that people one day get together in the streets and protest against the private central banks, to shut them down, because that, to me, I know, to me, that's the heart of the snake, the head of the snake, cut the head off, and I just wish one day people would just have enough and just get in the streets, Main Street, in every city, every town, and just shut the private central banks down. I had a question for you.
All right. Well, you're going to have to hold. You're going to have to hold on the question because we got to take a commercial break. But Bill, do not hang up the phone, and I will come right back to you as soon as we finish these words from our sponsors. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Bill in Pennsylvania, and Bill, you had another comment you wanted to share with us.
Oh, yeah, one last comment. I had a question for you. My last comment is if anybody out there, ever gets together and really forms an organized protest, I got some ideas for signs. No more PCB and bring back 11110. My question is, do you really think with all this, I would just say propaganda, I saw Trump's speech at the United Nations, and I couldn't be more disappointed about beating the war drums and, being a puppet for Israel and the things that is like in start. My question is, without babbling on about it, sorry about that, is that do you think that there's going to come a day, if they really do start something with North Korea, that China and Russia will collaborate together and say, look, man, we've had enough of this. You know, we're going to get together and literally invade the United States and then shut it all down. We're just tired of it, you know?
Well, Russia has already stated that their strategy, if the U.S. doesn't curb its militarism, is to basically go into every country the U.S. invades and turn it into a new Vietnam and wear the United States down in a war of attrition. And it's a very good strategy because the U.S. economy is on the verge of collapse. 16 years of war have drawn down all of our stockpiles. Our existing weapons are worn out. Our new weapons are overpriced junk. So they wouldn't need to actually invade the continental United States of America. China's already said that if the United States attacks North Korea without a good reason, that they will intervene. And I have absolutely no doubt that Russia and China have already agreed that working together, they can probably defeat the United States of America right now.
Yeah, because I really have a big concern that it might progress more than just going into the countries we're trying to invade unjustly. And then, you know, it's just like, you know, we're like a bunch of mafia hitmen or something. I just don't understand why somebody doesn't step up and shut this crap down, man. It's just we are the bad guys. I totally support everything you say. It's really woken me up where I look at everything differently now. It's like, man, what happened?
Well, the money happened.
You know?
The bankers happened. Wall Street happened. And we're living in a fascist economic dictatorship. We've lost all control over our country. Our elections are rigged. I mean, yes, Trump was able to overcome the election fraud, but look how quickly they brought him in line. If the will of the people is being ignored, then that, by definition, makes this a dictatorship.
It's crazy, and it's like right in front of us. I don't know how can we stop it?
I don't think
they
we can.
Really do have that much control.
Well, I don't think we can stop it. And again, I do not advocate violent revolution. Although I'm hearing all this talk about Antifa wants to start a civil war now. But it's very obvious to me that the United States is on the same path as the former Soviet Union, and it's basically heading toward a collapse for many of the same reasons the Soviet Union collapsed. The trick now is how to let the United States die without taking the rest of the world with it. That's going to be the trick.
Yeah, we're at a real weak point economically, militarily. And, you know, they might use North Korea as just a breaking point to where they just come over and invade our country. It's like, dude, we've had enough of this crap.
I don't think...
You know, it's like we might lose our freedoms and everything.
We already have, pretty much. I just got an email from somebody saying that their Firefox will not allow them to access the RBN website. And we know that Mozilla literally came on out and said that the next release of Firefox, and maybe it's already out, is only going to allow posting or linking to approved news sources, meaning the corporate media and the government, and everybody else is going to be blocked. So that's a very alarming development there. Anyway, Bill, we're going to let you go. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Kevin in West Virginia.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike, I want to throw you a curveball into some things, if that's all right with you.
Okay.
And talk to you about artificial intelligence, about AI.
Yes.
Without getting too deep into it, because this is a topic you can go very, very deep and have a very long discussion about, but I look at people like Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk, you know, and I hear them speak, and also at TED Talks, some of their conversations, you know, that I see with TED Talks. I'm curious to know, and I'm under the belief that we are no longer in control of the AI, that the AI is in control of us.
Well,
do you feel that way too? Or?
Well, artificial intelligence is still a very young concept in technology, but computers don't have to be artificially intelligent to be wielding tremendous control over our lives. And certainly nowhere is that more evident than with the economic system, where there are all these powerful computers, ultra-high-speed trading, and all these algorithms that do nothing but maximize the flow of capital to the owners of these machines. And they have skewed our economy tremendously. I even made a video about it, and I'll make a point of putting it up on whatreallyhappened.com next break, about how, certainly in the terms of the economics of the globe, computers are already ruling the earth.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I wonder, in their hubris that these people, you know, created this, do they realize that they have actually created a monster? And this, I'm not trying to say take over the robots, but I do believe that these things are already self-aware and self-learning and are already sentient. And, I wonder, and this is getting a little bit into esotericism, in the esoteric world, but I wonder, a nuts and bolts quantum computer or a biological quantum computer, the one thing that they're lacking, to be human is a soul. Can that be taken over, or can that, quote unquote, be possessed, I guess?
Well, nobody's...
I think you see where I'm getting at.
Nobody's really sure if there is such a thing as a soul anyway. It's a very comforting fiction for those who are afraid of death. As far as quantum computing, like the transputer, it's failing to live up to all the hype. And there are a few commercially available quantum computers, and as it turns out, when they're dealing with real-world problems rather than the demos, it turns out they're really not that much faster than the conventional von Neumann machine.
Okay, they were my questions that I had for you, and I thank you for answering, and you have a great and wonderful day.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. The next revolution in computers are going to be photonics, and they're starting to make some breakthroughs on that. And that will allow for much smaller chip sizes. You won't have the cooling issues to deal with, and that will result in computers that are powerful enough to have AI being small enough to fit into a robot. And at that point, there's going to be an interesting sociological issue to look at. All right, let's go to Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Glenn, are you there?
Hi, Mike. I am here. I heard the click there.
Okay.
Hi. In July of 2005, hydrogen peroxide bombs were hand-carried by terrorists into the London transit system and killed 52 people.
Okay.
So, so either that has something to do with it, or perhaps they were planning on disinfecting a whole lot of gunshot and shrapnel wounds.
Well, again, the totally anhydrous form of hydrogen peroxide is very, very, very dangerous. The stuff that you buy at the pharmacy is diluted with a huge amount of water.
No, that's what they used. I mean,
okay.
It's like like the over-the-counter stuff is typically like 3% or 5%. But the article that talked about this bombing specifically referenced hydrogen peroxide used pharmaceutical grade. But anyway, the other dimension was in 2016, the census population number for Puerto Rico was 3.4 million. 3.4 million, and that's how many people in there approximately are without power completely. That's a lot of people compared to a small island like Bermuda or something like that.
Yeah, and they don't have food and they don't have water. I mean, it's an absolute mess. They got hit with these 2 storms in a row, I mean, things are so messed up down there. They're still having trouble actually getting any information out as to just how bad it was.
Right. Well, and then the next phase in the ensuing weeks in Houston and Florida is you're going to have, problem with diseases, dysentery, typhus, cholera, West Nile virus, from mosquitoes, all that sort of stuff. They're starting to see, they're talking about that with insect repellents and stuff down in Houston and Florida. So we desperately need the pure water and enough of it to keep humans going and to keep things clean. Anyway, that's it for me, Mike. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot here, and we're going to let you go, and the phone lines are now open. Now, getting on back to domestic politics, it looks like Anthony Weiner is going to be going to jail for his sexting convictions here, and it was rather amazing and a little pathetic. Defense lawyers tried to portray the girl as the aggressor and saying she wanted to generate material for a book and influence the presidential election, and apparently the court wasn't buying that one. So there's been a plea bargain where Weiner has agreed not to appeal any sentence between 21 and 27 months. So he's going to go away for approximately 2 years, maybe. He may now be thinking about making a deal because, remember, Huma Abedin forwarded classified Clinton emails to Anthony, and he may be willing to make a little deal to talk about that in exchange for a reduced sentence here. Now, as you know, there's been a big dust-up over the admission that the FBI was, in fact, tapping Donald Trump's campaign both before and after the election. And remember when Donald Trump first came on out and said we're being tapped, and the whole corporate media said, oh, it's a fantasy, he's delusional, what kind of a kook nutcase would say something like that? And here we are all these months down the road, and it turns out it really did happen. And now they're starting to say that it is entirely possible that Donald Trump himself was recorded on these Manafort wiretaps. Now, supposedly the wiretaps were only on Manafort, but it looks like they caught Donald Trump on there as well. That's kind of casting a little bit of a wide net. They're still trying to make it look like this was justified by claiming Manafort agreed to give a briefing on the campaign to a Russian billionaire with close ties to the Kremlin. But a briefing is just a briefing, and it's fairly innocuous. Again, there's no evidence of Russian interference in our election, and they're trying to make this, they're trying to build a case out of absolutely nothing. They're building this case on sand. And meanwhile, of course, they're still ignoring as hard as they can the Clinton email server, the Clinton Foundation, and all this other skullduggery that's going on. Now, part of the big stink going into, between the election and Trump taking office were all these unmasking requests where supposedly classified reports on surveillance were being provided to the White House with the identities of people masked, which is the way it's supposed to be. And then somebody in the White House was asking for the real names. And it turns out most of it was being done by Samantha Power, Obama's ambassador to the United Nations. And apparently she was just using this unmasking requests of more than one per day. So she was just trying to unmask absolutely everybody that was out there and try and develop intelligence on that. Now, as you know, Obama is out there making new speeches, $400,000 a pop. He made a short speech to the Gates Group where he referred to himself as 96 times. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars for a speech to hear a man talk about himself. And talk about narcissistic personality syndrome. Now, we are starting to see a concerted effort by the corporate media to tarnish anybody who is not going along with the war agenda as a Russian propagandist. They already did it once earlier this year when the Washington Post came out with a list of websites that are arms of Russian propaganda, including, I'm proud to say, my own. And then they had to pull the story back when it turned out that their only criteria for declaring somebody to be working for the Russian propaganda ministry was linking to Russia Today. Well, apparently they've decided that really is all it takes because over at Media Matters, they have an article attacking Matt Drudge, how he's become a pipeline for Russian propaganda because he's linked to Russia Today nearly 400 times. Sputnik News and TASS since 2012. Oh, that proves that he's a pipeline for the Russian propaganda. And if you want to be a propagandist, you be a propaganda for the U.S. government, by golly. So we're going to see more and more of that. They're really trying to find some way they can shut down the internet and the independent media and find a way to get around that pesky First Amendment that allows us to all have our opinions about what's going on. So getting on back to Puerto Rico, it is a mess down there. I feel so sorry for those people. I visited Puerto Rico many years ago in my youth, and apparently one of the rivers, the storm surge took it 62 feet above the declared flood stage. So it's going to be a mess. We don't know how bad it is yet. They still can't get the information out. And apparently my concerns about the Arecibo Observatory were valid, despite the fact that they had shut the observatory down in advance of the storm. They're just now getting scientists back in there to evaluate the damage, but apparently it did suffer some damage over there as well. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. Now here's a very interesting story. This is from CNN. And it says, Hurricane Maria, U.S. mainland is not out of the woods yet. And it goes in to say that the current forecast does not show a direct hit on the East Coast, forecasters say, but such a path cannot be ruled out this far in advance. This strikes me as sensationalism to try and draw readers, because I'm keeping a close eye on all these storms, through various weather tracking websites and what are called the spaghetti tracks. And yes, the outer bands of Maria are going to bring some rain to the Carolinas and Virginia, but it's this idea that it's going to suddenly swerve to the west and hit the mainland. It's absurd. This is CNN grandstanding to try and bring their readership back. And it's needless, and I might add reckless fear-mongering. Now, again, we're not out of the hurricane season. There are other systems forming over in the East Atlantic. So for those of you living in the path of the hurricanes, you shouldn't relax just yet. But claiming that Maria is still going to hit the East Coast, that's a real long shot. And if it happens, I'll apologize to CNN. But right now, it looks like they're just trying to generate headlines and readership here. Interestingly enough, right after the big Mexico City earthquake, a nearby volcano, Popocatépetl, I hope I pronounced that correctly, it erupted right after the quake, and it's a big volcano. It's erupted a lot, and apparently it was actually triggered into new activity by this new earthquake. Boy, it's almost starting to look like one of those biblical epics. You know, we get the hurricanes and the quakes and the mosquitoes and the brain-eating organisms and the volcanoes explode. And again, as we mentioned yesterday, the ring of fire is just all over the place. Vanuatu, Japan, it's rocking and rolling out there. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, in our recently passed defense budget, it turns out there's a rider that was put in there, championed primarily by John McCain and Lindsey Graham, which basically would make it illegal to broadcast Russia Today here in America. Presumably that includes linking to them on the websites. Look how they went after Matt Drudge. And it's rather interesting to see this happening here in the United States of America, because when the Soviet Union enacted such laws, banning foreign media from broadcasting in their country, it was called the Iron Curtain. We were all told that was a bad thing. So it's getting very scary. The U.S. government is taking on all the trappings of a dictatorship now. Getting on to North Korea, North Korea is responding to all these new sanctions and this tough talk here and Trump's UN speech, saying it's the sound of a dog barking. Now, North Korean Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho slammed President Trump on Wednesday, saying his threat to destroy the nation amounted to the sound of a dog barking. And if he was thinking he could scare us with the sound of a dog barking, that's really a dog dream. Now, you need to understand, Koreans hold dogs in very low esteem. They're not fans of dogs the way Americans are. Dogs are way down there. They're something that you eat. So this is a major insult. Now, basically what's going on here, North Korea is amassing nuclear weapons to avoid the fate of other nations that have surrendered their weapons to the United States in the belief it would prevent an invasion, like Libya and Iraq. And North Korea has come on out and said, the example of Libya is a good example. They surrendered their nuclear weapon program, and look at the mess they're in right now. Had Libya kept their nuclear weapon program going, the U.S. would have left it alone. And again, there is this conflict out there where if Donald Trump pulls out of the P5+1 deal with Iran, there is no way that North Korea is ever going to believe any promises that Trump makes about how we'll welcome you back into the international community and we'll hug you and love you and give you nice back rubs and everything if you surrender your nuclear weapons. It won't happen. Look at what has happened to every single nation that surrendered their weapons. Iraq gave up their chemical weapons, got invaded. Syria gave up their chemical weapons, they're still being invaded. Iran gave up their nuclear weapons that are about to be invaded. Of course, North Korea is paying attention to all of this. So earlier today, Trump announced they're putting more sanctions on North Korea, and they're going after any banks that do business with North Korea. And it was rather interesting to hear Steve Mnuchin out there saying none of this is targeted on China, which is ridiculous. North Korea and China are trading partners. There's no way you can sanction North Korea where it's not going to have a negative impact on China. We've got to take a break here for station break. We'll be right back. And And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 2. And Defense Secretary Jim Mattis is out there saying that the U.S. must face the somber reality of the military option on North Korea. He's just going on out there and saying that military action could be necessary should diplomacy fail to curb the nation's hostile provocations. What provocations? I don't see North Korea sailing their warships along the U.S. borders or flying armed bombers along our coasts. I really don't. It's just not there. There are no provocations. The only real threat that North Korea presents to the U.S. government is that they're refusing to bow down. They're refusing to be bullied. And that's inspiring other countries to stand up and say, we're not going to be bullied by the United States anymore. And that's why the United States wants to make an example out of them. Going to go on and just say, how dare you defy the emperor of the world? We're going to take care of you as quickly as we can. So, there we are. Now, there is an aspect to all of this that people need to look at. Obviously, Seoul, South Korea is very, very concerned about North Korea's vast amount of conventional artillery that are drilled into these hardened tunnels all along the mountains on the northern part of the DMZ. And they can reach Seoul. And it is unrealistic for Mattis and Trump to try and reassure South Korea that they have a way of attacking North Korea where there will not be a retaliation. But it goes further than that. Konstantin Sikyov, a Russian military analyst and president of the Academy for Geopolitical Problems, has basically pointed out we need to remember there are 25 nuclear power stations in South Korea, all within the range of North Korea's known working missiles. And what North Korea could really do, if they are attacked by the United States, they could launch their missiles against those 25 power stations. You would have 25 Chernobyl disasters on the Korean peninsula. It would make Fukushima and Chernobyl look like minor annoyances in comparison. And obviously China would be very concerned about that kind of radiation. So would Japan. There'd be no way to contain it. I am appalled at the reckless disregard for the possible outcomes that we're seeing inside our government's foreign policy thinking. They seem to stop at, we're going to get North Korea, we're going to get Iran, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. There could be some problems resulting from that. Oh, that's not my concern here. My concern is victory, and we'll let future generations clean up the mess. Now, the other day we pointed out how a report came on out saying that the government's climate models were proving to be faulty. They didn't accurately predict what's going on because they were biased towards a worst-case scenario. Well, what if that kind of attitude is also infecting the planners and simulations for these war games? What if they're hopelessly biased toward the best possible outcome? They're going to have the same result. Their models are not going to accurately forecast what's really going to happen. It certainly didn't for the IPCC, and it probably isn't for the war plan. I mean, look at this. According to Wesley Clark, this was all supposed to be over and done with in 2008. And here we are at 2017 coming up on 2018. So it's obviously not going as originally planned here. Now, China is very concerned. They're saying the North Korean situation is more serious by the day and cannot be allowed to spin out of control. Unfortunately, it is being driven out of control by Washington, D.C., which apparently is just looking for an excuse to prove how butch they are and get another war going. Now, China has already indicated that if the U.S. tries to attack North Korea without North Korea having done anything to justify it, and by the way, testing a weapon is not justification for an invasion, China says they'll intervene. So we're really risking a major global war here. Now, Japan has moved one of their missile interceptor batteries to Hokkaido because that's the island that North Korea's last test missile flew over. And they raised the alarm and said, oh, it's terrible, it's coming over. And well, you know, countries fly missiles and satellites over each other's territory out there in space all the time. They don't make a big deal about it. And this moving of the anti-missile battery to Hokkaido is a totally empty gesture. It's nothing but propaganda. On that last missile test, the North Korean missile flew over Hokkaido at an altitude of 475 miles, way out of reach of any of the Japanese, or for that matter, the American interceptors to reach. They can't hit something that high. All of the missile defense systems are built around defending a known target when the inbound threat is in the terminal phase, not shooting down a test missile that's whizzing over your head and heading up there for the walruses. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining our network. Now, over in Syria, looking at the current situation map, it's obvious the Syrian forces are making tremendous gains. They're shoving the anti-Assad forces and even the Kurds into tighter and tighter areas. And there's been a major al-Qaeda failure up there in northern Hama. 40 militants were killed. And, of course, the militants are blaming Russian attack helicopters and warplanes, as well as a lack of support from the moderate opposition for the failure. So they're pointing fingers at each other. And yes, those Russian helicopters are formidable. Now, Russia has been quietly dropping hints over the last several days about how Syrian forces are coming under fire from areas where U.S. special forces are located, forces that are supposed to be there to lend medical assistance. And now Russia's getting a little more direct, and they're saying that Russia will target areas in Syria where U.S. special forces and U.S.-backed militia are operating if its own forces come under fire from there, something that has already happened twice. And they're saying, basically, they're going to return fire. And that is really going to mess things up. Now, I mentioned this earlier with the caller, but let's go into it in detail. Apparently, an army of moderates who are being controlled by their CIA handlers tried to double-cross the Russians. They violated a ceasefire agreement and launched an attack with tanks and artillery on the Syrian government north of Hama in the de-escalation zone, which has now been thwarted. They're trying to halt the Syrian army's successful advance. A key part of the plan was to capture 29 Russian soldiers, which would have been a major embarrassment for Russia. And here's where the story gets interesting. These 29 soldiers were trapped for several hours by these militants engaged in a heavy firefight. And finally, a Spetsnaz unit, partially composed of military natives of the Northern Caucasus, Chechens, broke through the terrorist line. And at that point, Russian Sukhoi jets did pinpoint strikes against the opposition force, which was then followed up with an artillery salvo. And the Russians were able to get their 29 people out. And everybody scattered. The Russians and Syrians gave pursuit. And in total, about 850 terrorists, 11 tanks, 4 armored vehicles, 46 pickups, 5 mortars, 20 trucks, and 30 weapons warehouses were destroyed in 24 hours by the Russian counterattack. Meanwhile, the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces are continuing their drive against ISIS in Deir ez-Zor countryside, trying to capture the gas and oil fields before the Syrian government forces can get there. See, it's all driven by the oil and the oil revenues. Okay. Now, do you remember that military exercise that Russia did on their own territory? Joint Russian-Belarus exercise, Zapad 2017. And they were out there exercising their troops and just training on their own territory, and the Western media went crazy. It was, oh, they're getting ready for an attack. It's a Trojan horse. They're coming across the border. They're getting ready. We need to bomb them now. Well, the exercise is now over, and all of those forces are on their way back home. Units of the Russian Air Force are already headed back to their home base. There was no invasion. They were just exercising their military forces on their own territory, unlike the United States and Japan and South Korea, who are running their military exercises off the coast of North Korea. That's a provocation. Now, the United States is denying the reports that were coming on out about how they've opened a military base in Israel. And basically, what they're saying is, yes, they built several buildings inside the country, but it's not actually a military base. They're not saying what it is, but they're trying to deny the fact that it's a military base because it's a political embarrassment. It's another reminder about how the U.S. is a vassal state of Israel. And they're still trying to prevent the American people from figuring that out, but I think they failed miserably on that. Okay. Now, there is apparently this Bethlehem-based Palestinian non-governmental organization, Badil, and it's reported there's been a sudden significant increase in Palestinian injuries in the refugee camps last year, most of which are caused by live ammunition, and mostly in the lower limbs of the youths in the camp. And apparently this is an Israeli tactic called kneecapping, and residents of the Dasheh camp say that an Israeli army commander, who's referred to as Captain Nidal, is saying the plan is he's going to make half of them disabled and let the other half push the wheelchairs. And that is the reason for this sudden rash of kneecapping of the young Palestinians. They're shooting them in the legs, trying to cripple them. Now, more and more they're talking about the potential for Kurdish independence, and certainly Israel wants that. Israel's already committed to send 200,000 Israelis of Kurdish descent to a newly independent Kurdistan. You're already seeing flags of Israel waving at the Kurdish independence rallies, which has made both Turkey and Iraq very, very nervous about what's really going on. But companies are already lining up to take advantage of Kurdistan now having their own oil resources to sell. And it's raising the question, could this spark a new oil war? If you have all these competing countries trying to sell their oil, they're going to lower their prices. Kurdistan is probably not going to be a member of OPEC anytime soon. So they can go their own way. And we have seen so many countries that have been hurt ever since the U.S. launched that misguided, poorly thought out oil price war against Russia, which backflashed terribly and wound up hurting a lot more countries in the West than it did Russia. Saudi Arabia got slammed. They've had to issue government bonds for the first time in decades. They've gone from being a very wealthy, prosperous nation to being heavily in debt. And now Algeria is seeing their international reserves plummet by more than 40%. Since the oil price fell starting in 2014. So they do these things without really thinking them all the way through. Article out of Blacklisted News, it has started creeping global de-dollarization. And it's happening very slowly, and this is why the corporate media isn't mentioning it, but more and more countries are starting to move away from the dollar. They're denominating their oil in yuan and rubles. And it is happening very, very slowly. And the U.S. is trying to get ahead of it and slam any country that drops the dollar. They did that to Iraq. They did that to Libya. They're getting ready to do it to Venezuela. But if everybody were to drop the dollar all at the same time, that's the end. The U.S. simply cannot declare war on the rest of the entire planet at this point. Now, we've talked before about the pension problem. And the pension problem, for the most part, arose out of two factors. The first is declining revenues, declining earnings. Contributions to pension funds are not what they used to be. But the big problem goes all the way back to 2008 and the mortgage-backed security fraud. Because when they were putting together these mortgage bundles, Wall Street's pet rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, all of them, said these are AAA rated. And that made it legal for pension funds to invest in these mortgage bundles because pension funds or any investment instrument that's dealing with retirees are required by law to only invest in AAA rated securities because they're dealing with customers who don't have the luxury of time of starting over and rebuilding their lives again. And then, of course, the whole fraud collapsed. The pensions were defunded, and by and large, most of the people running these pensions are unwilling to point the finger of blame where it really deserves to go, which is Wall Street. And they're screaming that people are living too long, the pensioners are demanding too much. But there's a monster mess out there, and according to this story that came out of the Daily Sheeple, there is a $700 billion public employee pension shortfall. Most of the states are only 6.7% funded to their obligations. Most states under 1%. They have only 1% of the cash reserves they need to meet their expected obligations. It is a huge mess. In many ways, we're seeing these state governments, like the federal government, default on the American worker. They don't want to default on the banks. That would harm the credit rating, but we can default on the Social Security people. Nothing bad's going to happen to us. Over in Europe, this situation in Spain regarding Catalonia is really starting to heat up. Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy said the referendum on the independence of Catalonia cannot be held, adding that the government of the autonomous region should give up this dream. He says it's a pipe dream. Now, little point here. Spain, as a member of the United Nations, is bound by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which gives all people the right to self-determination. If you feel that your national government is not doing a good job, you have a right to have a referendum for independence and form your own country. It's something that people conveniently forget when they're talking about keeping Catalonia in Spain or keeping Ukraine, the one that seceded from Ukraine. I'm blanking on the name right now. So many of them out there. So this is really heating up, and it could lead to a new civil war. Now, Spain has sent a cruise ship to dock in Barcelona. It is holding 16,000 riot police. It is an implied threat that if Catalonia goes ahead with the independence referendum, that there will be blood in the streets. It sounds really good, but there's a downside, and that is that those 16,000 police sitting on that cruise ship have now become a target. And I don't think I would have handled it quite that way unless the goal of Spain is to have somebody try and sink that ship and use that as an excuse to go in militarily to Catalonia and slap them down. Meanwhile, up in Brussels, they've apparently made a deal with a group of South American countries for beef, for meat supply, and it's angered a lot of the member state EU farmers who are cattle farmers, and they're saying it's going to harm us, it's going to devastate us. Why are you going to South America when we have a domestic internal cattle industry here? And it doesn't really make a lot of sense unless somebody up in Brussels was financially encouraged, to put it delicately, to hand the contract off to South America. If you really think about it, it's going to cost a lot more to bring those cattle from South America to Europe in refrigerated ships than it would be to just have the domestic supply there. So it looks like this wasn't well through, or there's some corruption going on there. Now, apparently, over in Great Britain, 4-year-old Prince George is going to a school, Battersea, Thomas's Battersea. And interestingly enough, the school has banned best friends. More about that when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're in the PC section of our talking points here today. So over in Great Britain, you know, the royal family, the 4-year-old Prince George is already going to school, and this school has decided to ban children from having best friends. Teachers are encouraging all students to form bonds with one another equally to avoid creating feelings of exclusion among those without best friends. Now, it sounds really good, but it's not human nature. And I think this illustrates the primary failing of the liberal theory, if you will. Because the liberal political philosophy is based on the idea that we are all born with absolutely blank minds, the tabula rasa, the blank slate, and everything that we think or feel is a result of the environment. And so the political philosophy is if we control the environment, we control what is inside people's head and how they behave. Unfortunately, all of this goes back to a book called Coming of Age in Samoa by Margaret Mead, in which she claimed to have found a culture where young people went from childhood to adulthood without the turmoil and trauma and emotionality of adolescence. And it turned out the book was a complete fraud. And it has been discredited many, many times, but the liberals won't go back and look at it. Their prime assumption is justification for their agenda, any more than Al Gore is willing to go back and look at the raw temperature data for the last couple of centuries to find out how wrong he is. But no, we are not born with absolutely blank minds. We are born with the accumulated instincts of millions of years of evolution. And when you try and get in the way of those, you're going to run into some problems. At the very least, you're going to create a lot of very neurotic people. And this is why, despite all the unisex this and make everybody dress the same, girls are still going to act like girls and boys are going to still act like boys, except for those who have been brainwashed to think that there's something else in between. But this idea of banning somebody from having a best friend because you don't want the other kids to feel disadvantaged, well, isn't making friends part of that socialization process, that building of structures within the community, within the neighborhood? You have to make friends with your neighbors, with your coworkers, with your students, to get things to function. And I wonder if maybe the real agenda here is to raise a generation of young people that are simply afraid to talk with one another and are therefore dependent more on that view screen on the wall to tell them what's going on. But it's a little bit out there. And joining it in the outer reaches of the solar system, over at Ohio State University, they've had what is called a privilege workshop, which sounds okay, but what they're pushing there, in this session entitled Interrupting Racism, Tips and Tools for White People, basically came on out and said that only white people can be racists. Nobody else is a racist. Blacks are never racist. Hispanics are never racist. Only white people are racist. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my entire life. There are people who are not racist of all colors. There are people who are very racist of all colors. When I was married to my first wife, Broadzilla, she was Ashkenazi. And her family were the most racist people I've ever met, especially toward other subgroups of the Jews. So this idea, what a ridiculous idea that only white people can be racist. Why are white people all of a sudden under attack in this country? And we have all these people coming in from the Middle East and Africa saying, well, we want the life that you have. It's not fair that you have this evolved civilization. Well, we have the civilization because we built it. Europeans built Europe. Africans built Africa. It's never been the other way around. And jamming the African population into Europe isn't going to change things. It's just going to create a huge amount of hostility, as it already has. There is such a thing as inherent human nature. And yes, sometimes it needs to be controlled, particularly in the areas of crime, murder, rape, robbery. But you can't pretend it does not exist and then just dream up all this wild stuff based on that assumption. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go back to the phones here, I got another story to share with you. And you have to wonder, this is in the Department of what are they thinking? Now, over in Miami-Dade, just hours after Irma was finished doing what they were doing, and this guy is at his home trying to clean up the mess, And all of a sudden he gets a visit from this official from Miami-Dade County who proceeds to cite him because his fence has been knocked down and his swimming pool is now visible to the street, which is considered an attractive nuisance and a potential danger because it might lure children in to go for a swim and they could drown, blah, 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 blah. I mean, the guy's just had his house smashed, and it's not like the hardware stores are open and he can go get the lumber to fix the fence. And they actually cited this guy. It's like common sense has become an endangered species in this country here. All right, we're going to go to the phones here. Mo in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thanks for taking my call. I was trying to stay on topic with the economy, then you switched over to the way they're trying to get everybody to think the same. And I have a question. I want to share a question about the monetary system, but just to comment on what you were saying about the way they're trying to get everybody to be the same. I mean, that's pretty much what sheep are, aren't they?
Yes.
All the sheep think the same. They start getting the ones that, get ideas about breaking from the herd. That's not a good thing. So they get the herd dogs in there, And isn't that really the same thing? They're just trying to get so we can be controlled. Isn't that it?
Yeah, it is. Almost reminds me of that Monty Python sketch on Harold the Flying Sheep.
I love Monty Python. For some reason, I don't remember that one.
Okay. Well, it was on, I think, their first album. Anyway, but you're absolutely right. They're trying to basically make us all interchangeable units with no idea of who we are, what our past is, what our history is, because people without a strong sense of identity are easier to control. And again, this idea that schools are trying to teach students not to have best friends. I mean, it is natural for people to have certain attractions to other individuals as friends. And this idea that we should automatically treat everybody as if there are the same degree of friendship and buddy-buddy, that's ridiculous. I mean, there are going to be people who are going to be nice to us. There are going to be people who are not very nice. Why should I be friends with people who are not very nice? It's ridiculous.
You were born with a free brain. I mean, what about just do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt somebody else? The non-aggression policy that you and Ron Paul, and that's all there is.
That's all we really need. That's all we really need. We don't, I hate to say it, going back to some of those 10 commandments is really all we need. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness. That's the only guide that you really need here. And we have all these other things about, you can't have best friends. You shouldn't assume that your gender is what your anatomy is. It's all designed to keep us confused.
Well, you nailed it. Couldn't agree more. The question I had on the monetary system, I haven't heard you. I'm sorry, I had a tooth pulled, so my voice is kind of
okay.
Language ain't coming out too good. But I'm just recovering from it. But my question to you was, I don't hear you talk too much about Bitcoin. And to me, I'll tell you my thoughts, and then I want to just get what you think about it. I think Bitcoin, when they look to who started this Satomochi, whatever it was, and you really research it, it really seems to come down to the deep state. And this is maybe I don't know. Obviously, I don't have any proof, but nobody can really nail this down. And I think my thought is what they're going to do is they're going to get as many people to pile into this, and maybe you even said this, and then crash the Bitcoin. Everybody will run to either dollar or gold, and I don't know which one they'll run to. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think they're going to run to gold because experts are now saying that the dollar is entering a multi-year bear decline. And part of that is because of all the overprinting over at the Federal Reserve, and they're trying to hide how much new money is being created and showered all over Wall Street. But inevitably, we're seeing the effects of inflation start to raise our food prices, our fuel prices. If you're buying things from outside the country, those prices are going on up. We're starting to see that at the big box stores. But I think people will be going to gold unless it's outlawed, and we keep hearing about how they want to try and do that one again. But as far as Bitcoin is concerned, again, I've always had problems with it. There is really nothing that backs it up. It's a true virtual currency, but we've seen it wide open to manipulation. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by a true virtual currency. If you take so much silver and you turn it into a silver dollar, you can then eventually melt that down and get that same amount of silver back out. That's the value that's in there. In the U.S. silver dollar, the money was the actual silver content, not the coin itself. You can have your computer do so many hours of Bitcoin mining to get a single Bitcoin, but you can't get all of that computer power and work back out of the Bitcoin once you've got it. And that right there is what tells me there's really no underlying value to it.
Wow, that's exactly right. It's a one-way street in that respect, and there's no intrinsic value. So, I think it's a Ponzi. I think it's the ultimate tulip Ponzi scheme. I think.
Well, I think, some of the thinking behind it was, in terms of having a currency that was not issued by a central bank, that was a good idea. But the failure to tie it to some kind of a tangible commodity of universally recognized value was the weak point. Now, maybe Bitcoin should have been the first iteration of the Electro and say that, the Bitcoin represents so many kilowatt hours of electricity, and then you could turn around and pay for your electric bill with that, which is your way of getting that electricity back out of it. But without a commodity base, any currency is a fiat currency, whether it is crypto, cybernetic, or just, printing on a slab of wood.
I think that's what I think, too. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Steve in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm catching the show a little late today. I hope you didn't already cover this, but I was looking and hearing the radio this morning about Donald Trump is putting new sanctions on North Korea, which is nothing more than economic war. He's playing with North Korea now. He's really trying to provoke them quite steadily to take the bait, and they're not taking. I hope they don't take the bait. But other than that, I noticed that we never hear in the news anymore about draining the swamp at all. I mean, everything is off the table now as far as those discussions go. Draining the swamp, Hillary Clinton prosecution is off the table. They're not even talking about that. It's just North Korea, Russia, Syria. Those are the things. They're playing a very good strategic shell game of diversion topics to keep your mind off of what he's talked about in the past. And last but least, as far as my wife came up with a new, Donald Trump is using a lot of labels on people these days, and Donald, Kim Jong-un is Rocket Man. And my wife said, well, since we never hear about drain the swamp anymore, we'll just start calling Donald Trump Swamp Thing. And so you being a Hollywood guy, you probably remember that movie, Swamp Thing.
Oh, yeah. There's actually been more than one.
Yes. Last thing is, I did hear something else. Maybe you talked about it, but household economic wealth has gone up. Did you hear that?
No, I heard something to that effect, but I imagine, for the one percenters, that's certainly true.
Well, they were basing it on Wall Street only, and I'm sure that did not. Yes, you're one percenters. That did not generalize to the rest of the population. But this was something I heard on in between Laura Ingram's show on that little news thing they have there. But it said household income has increased quite a bit. I can't remember the percentage. But I'm looking around, and like you always say, look for what should be there and isn't, and I don't see that at all. And then we talk about on RBN's website yesterday how Toys R Us are going to be closing, or bankruptcy at least. This is going to be a dismal Christmas holiday retail year. It's going to be dismal.
This is going to be the last nail in the coffin for some iconic retailers. They're all hoping there's going to be a reversal, and we're going to have a really good Christmas shopping season this year because it's been dismal for the last 8-9 years. And the holiday shopping season is literally when these retailers make 1/3 of their revenue for the entire year. But that has not been the case anymore because we just don't have any money out here, and we don't want to borrow anymore. I mean, they're desperate. I mean, the Christmas stuff is already going up in the stores. Claire and I were over at the local big box store, and they got all the trees are up there, and the decorations, and the ribbons, and it's all over the place, along with all the holiday packaged versions of coffee and candy and everything else they want you to start buying. And frankly, for me, it's a turnoff. We still have Halloween and Thanksgiving to get through, and by the time we really get to the actual December, where we're actually getting close to Christmas, I'm going to be in full Ebenezer Scrooge mode, and it's just going to be bah humbug. because by the time we get to December, it's no longer going to be decorations, it's going to be decor, and it's going to look really, really tacky. But all of these holidays, it's just one marketing scam after the other. And maybe I'm spoiled because many, many years ago, back in the 1980s, I had occasion to experience Christmas in Europe, specifically in Germany, in Munich, and it spoiled me for the American Christmas. Because what I experienced there in Germany was just like I imagined Christmas was supposed to be from, reading about it in storybooks and everything. And, seriously, goodwill toward all men, a time of cheer and generosity. I mean, carolers were out there. You had total strangers giving you little bits of candy and everything. It was a very amazing experience. And compared to that, the American Christmas is just incredibly hollow and shallow, and it's just another marketing come-on. And it's very hard to get excited about it. And Claire and I are probably not going to do a Christmas tree this year because we just really can't get into the spirit of it, especially those little nativity scenes. I have a real hard time looking at those without realizing those are the people we're now bombing to steal their oil.
Right. Now, this will be 4 bad retail years in a row for Christmas, if I'm right. This will be 4 in a row.
I think it's going to be 8. It's going to be 8. Yeah.
Last question for you, since you said you were in Germany. You must experience Glühwein. Did you try any Glühwein?
Doesn't ring a bell.
It's mulled wine. In America, they call it mulled wine.
Oh,
in Germany, they call it Glühwein.
Yes, I did. And I absolutely love it. And since then, I've made a point of getting mulling spice and making my own when I have occasion to be having a holiday party, which, again, is not going to be this year. But, yes, I did try it. I just didn't know it by that name.
Okay. Hey. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Murr in Wisconsin. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Crimea River.
Yeah. Next commercial break, it came back to me. That's what I was trying to talk about with Ukraine, but I kept thinking Cyprus, but I knew it wasn't that. And I had a brain fart. It happens at my age. I'm getting old and decrepit.
Just think about the funny things with Putin taking off his sunglasses, Crimea River, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
I was looking back through my notes back in 2013. I had written something I was just really moved me, and I can't find that right now. But basically, it was just that the soldiers look so sweet and innocent, and here they are all dressed alike and all enthusiastic and I'm writing, but the generals are grinding their teeth with a wargasm,
Yeah, good name. Good phrase there. We seem to be having a lot of that in this country. John McCain, and by the way, I got to tell you, I'm really fed up with John McCain using his illness to duck answering questions about real issues. If he's not able to deal with the questions about the issues, he should go ahead and retire. But instead, he's out there still pushing for war and everything. And anytime somebody says, "Oh, well, what about this? Is it going to go wrong?" And he goes, "Oh, my head. I got to take a break. I'm sorry." And it's just, come on, give us a break here.
Yeah, there's no retiring for that guy. He's running on rims, shooting out sparks.
Yeah, yeah.
I also saw here where it was 12/12/13, and it was from your show. And I won't read it, but it's Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Very, very nice. It must have been on your quote of the day thing. So if you want to look back on 12/12/13, you'll find it.
It's in the master quotes file. I think you're talking about the one about how we should have stood up and fought, and because we didn't, we ultimately deserved everything that happened to us. And it's probably this. Oh,
this is another one. It's very good. It's let me see here. Gradually, it was disclosed to me that the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts.
Yes.
This line shifts inside us. It oscillates with the years, and even within hearts overwhelmed by evil, one small bridgehead of good is retrieved. I'm trying to read my writing. And even in the best of all hearts, there remains an unuprooted small corner of evil.
True, and it is a very good quote.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
Thank you.
All right.
Crimea River.
We'll certainly do our best here. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. getting on back to the news here. Now, we know that along with civil forfeiture, the issuing of traffic citations has gone away from maintaining public safety into being yet another revenue-generating mechanism. We are living under a government that, along with taxes and fees and tariffs and everything else, is now openly pillaging and plundering their own people to keep the war budget going here. And so we've got this article in the Knoxville News Sentinel that reveals the Blount County Sheriff's Office received $91,000 from the Department of Homeland Security to create specialized enforcement on a section of U.S. Highway 129 near the North Carolina state line. In other words, the Department of Homeland Security is paying police all over the country to increase the amount of tickets they are writing. And again, it's just astounding. So here's another story where you're saying, what's wrong with these people? Apparently, nurses at the Naval Hospital Jacksonville in Florida have been fired and may face legal action. They were apparently taking selfies with brand newborn babies, handling them inappropriately. They were holding them up and dancing them to music. One of them was giving a baby the middle finger, saying how I feel about these mini Satans. These are supposed to be nurses. And you have to wonder, what's wrong with these people? It's just absolutely insane. All right, we're coming up here on another commercial break, and we are going to be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, we've had another unfortunate tragedy at the hands of the Oklahoma City Police. And apparently on Tuesday night, there was a deaf man who was carrying a metal pipe who was shot to death by the Oklahoma City Police on Tuesday night, even as the neighbors tried to tell the officers he could not hear their commands. He was apparently facing away from the officers, and they kept telling him, drop the pipe, or what I guess they thought he had a gun, drop it and turn around. And, of course, he couldn't hear them. He was deaf. And the neighbors were saying, he's deaf, he can't hear you. And the officers shot and killed him. It's a little out there. All right, let's talk about the world of computers. This Equifax thing is turning out to be an epic disaster. It is affecting at least 143 million people. I think it's affecting a lot more through secondary and tertiary influence. And basically, everyone's saying, why didn't Equifax protect the data? Well, because corporations don't really care about the customers. We're the product. Our credit rating is their product. And they weren't really concerned about protecting the data. They had an unpatched flaw. They knew they had an unpatched flaw. They had a break-in last March. They didn't even tell anybody. It was all about protecting their business, not the consumers. Now, over at FedEx, they're totaling up the losses from last year's NotPetya ransomware attack, and the total cost comes to $300 million in lost business and cleanup costs. $300 million. And still, the U.S. government's attitude is, no big deal. We have more important things to do, like North Korea, which hasn't actually done anything to us, or Iran, which hasn't done anything to us, if you ignore all the propaganda about Iranian hackers. And we got to deal with Russia, and we got to deal with all the rest of this. We don't have time to take care of you, the American people. Apparently, over in Great Britain, England's second largest police force has admitted to the BBC they're still on Windows XP, which leaves it vulnerable to a WannaCry type attack. So what we're seeing here is the problem is as much laziness and carelessness on the part of the people with these computer systems as it is the cyber criminals themselves. Right now, the problem is spinning out of control. More data has been lost or stolen the first half of this year than all of last year. Digital security company Gemalto's breach level index, published on Wednesday, found that an average of 10.4 million records are exposed or stolen every single day. During the first 6 months of 2017, there were 918 reported data breaches worldwide. And, of course, there are all the unreported ones, because we have to protect our company's image. We'll be back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about computers. More specifically, we're talking about the huge volume of data that is being lost and stolen. Your data, your information on these computers. And it is epidemic. We are hearing that 10.4 million records are exposed or swiped every single day. There were 918 reported data breaches worldwide in the first half of 2017, and we know a lot of companies won't report these breaches. Equifax didn't report the breach they had last March because they're trying to protect their public image. And the security company, Gemalto, has discovered that less than 1% of all this stolen data had been encrypted. In other words, these companies are so unconcerned about your privacy and safety and security, they're not even bothering to encrypt the data they have on you. I mean, it's just extreme recklessness. I mean, encryption isn't that difficult. If you want a free encryption tool, go to my Rivero Challenges the NSA page. Take the 10,000 Monkeys code and modify it. That's a very powerful code, very difficult to break. Now, the other day we talked about a hack in which a recent update of CCleaner, which stands for Crap Cleaner, was compromised at the distribution server level. And by the way, the current version of CCleaner is okay to use. They got the compromised versions off the distribution server, so you can go back to using it. It's a very, very good tool. And apparently, the malware that was in the compromised CCleaner was targeting top tech companies in an attempt to lift their IPs and map out their internal networks. And apparently, this was targeting Cisco, Microsoft, Sony, Intel, VMware, Samsung, D-Link, Epson, MSI, Linksys, Singtel, and the DVR DNS org domain. So this is all very sophisticated. This isn't some kiddie in his parents' basement with a script generator. These are sophisticated, organized crime operations, or it could even be the government itself. According to Kaspersky, the Equation Group hackers are actually NSA. So there's a real vulnerability in the hackers being able to get into the servers used to download software and replace it with a compromised version. And apparently the Finfisher government spy tool has been found hiding in commonly used applications like WhatsApp and Skype and was inserted the same way. The distribution servers for WhatsApp and Skype were gotten into, and Finfisher was added to the download package. And this is an advanced form of surveillance software. It's used by police departments. It's sold to global governments and intelligence agencies, and it can be used to snoop on webcam feeds, keystrokes, microphones, and web browsing. So they're out there looking at all of these tools, and apparently companies being hit include WhatsApp, Skype, Avast, VLC Player, and WinRAR. And they're saying basically because they're going after the installers, it doesn't really matter what code is inside the installer. They can compromise anything that is coming off with the Finfisher tool. Now, apparently, a security researcher working for California-based cyber resiliency firm UpGuard has discovered a wide-open, public-facing, misconfigured Amazon Web Server S3 cloud storage bucket, and it contained roughly a gigabyte's worth of credentials and configuration files for the back end of dozens of Viacom properties. Viacom left sensitive data and secret access key on this unsecured Amazon server. And these exposed credentials discovered by UpGuard would have been enough for hackers to take down Viacom's internal IT infrastructure and internet presence, allowing them to access cloud servers belonging to MTV, Paramount Pictures, and Nickelodeon. And among the data exposed in the leak was Viacom's master key to its Amazon Web Services account and the credentials required to build and maintain Viacom servers across its many subsidiaries and dozens of brands. They left it on a publicly available server. And here we have another one. They're calling this one the biggest computer leak in history. It's over at Brass Check. And it's saying political data gathered on more than 198 million U.S. citizens was exposed this month after a marketing firm contracted by the Republican National Committee stored internal documents on a publicly accessible Amazon server. And the data leak contained a wealth of personal information on roughly 61% of the U.S. population, home addresses, birth dates, phone numbers, advanced sentiment analysis used by political groups to predict where you're going to vote on certain issues like gun ownership, abortion, and so forth, religious affiliation, ethnicity. And it was just wide open there. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. We're talking about computers and security, and we're seeing this pattern that along with more aggressive cyber criminals, we're seeing a continuing pattern of carelessness and disregard on the part of the owners of these servers. They're not encrypting the data. They're not patching their systems. As they should be, and we're supposed to entrust them with all of this very personal private information. Well, Claire and I finally got a notice from our bank saying that our information may have been compromised in the Equifax leak. They didn't know it for sure, but we needed to take steps. So we gritted our teeth and we signed up for LifeLock. And it has already paid for itself because it came on back and it found all kinds of information about us on the dark web, mostly passwords, which we've now all changed. But so far, it looks like a really good deal. We got the plan that goes for $30 a month, and frankly, I'm very angry that we have to spend our money and our time guarding our data that's collected by these companies without our permission. And it should be the other way. If these companies are going to be engaged in collecting information on us, there ought to be some mandate that they exercise reasonable care over it. And first and foremost, encrypt it all. It isn't that hard to encrypt data. They're just being lazy. They don't want to hire somebody to manage the encryption for them. And no, the encryption, unless you're using the 10,000 Monkeys code, the encryption is wide open to government agencies. But at least let's block the cyber criminals. They don't even seem to care anymore. The whole system is set up to allow this sort of stuff to go on. And apparently Apple has now confirmed that in iOS 11, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi are not fully disabled when toggled off in the control center. Even when you toggle Wi-Fi and Bluetooth off in your device that is running iOS 11, it's still available for AirDrop, AirPlay, Apple Pencil, Apple Watch, location services, and continuity features like handoff and instant hotspot. And obviously it's still available for the cyber criminals who are walking through the shopping mall with a backpack with a Wi-Fi hotspot and a laptop programmed to steal your credentials. And by the way, several Christmases ago, we had one of those radio-enabled credit cards. And Claire got burned by somebody at our local shopping mall. And we don't want these radio-enabled credit cards. And now most of our credit card companies are saying, you have to have them. You have to have them. Or the Edge Connector. The Edge Connectors are safer. So one of our listeners sent in a radio-opaque wallet to keep the credit cards in. But again, they're putting the burden of our security on us. We're spending our money, our time, to protect the data they've taken from us in the first place. And I didn't want them to have it. Now, apparently on iOS 11, you can still go into the settings application and totally disable Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. But most people are going to think, well, if it's off in the control panel, that's it. I don't need to worry. Yes, you do. Now, Apple is conceding that their new latest iWatch has some problems with its most important feature, which is the ability to make phone calls and access data without an iPhone nearby. Up until recently, if you had an iPhone, it had to be paired, an iWatch, it had to be paired with your iPhone. And everything it did through the iPhone. They wanted the new iWatch to be a standalone device. And apparently it's got serious problems. And several prominent reviewers have said they can't recommend the device because of this Wi-Fi glitch that causes cellular connectivity problems. Now, obviously, along with Wi-Fi, there has to be a cellular system in there. And again, I think it's a little too much. I mean, we've got the iPhone. Why do I need an iWatch? And believe it or not, Apple is actually looking at an iRing, just getting it down smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, Slack has had several fingers wagged at it because it's distributing open Linux-based versions of its technology that are not digitally signed, which is contrary to the industry best practice. Now, the absence of a digital signature creates a means for cybercriminals to sling around doctored versions of the software that users won't be able to distinguish from the real thing. The whole point of a digital signature, it's a checksum that is generated from the entire binary. And if you change the binary, then the checksum is not going to work. And apparently Slack was notified of this back in August and still haven't fixed it. It's just ridiculous out there. Okay, let's talk a little bit about human-caused global warming. They have winter weather in Idaho's mountains on the final day of summer. Today's the final full day of the summer season. And apparently Bogus Basin picked up an inch of snow overnight. There are winter weather advisories in place for Idaho's east central mountains. Elevations about 8,000 could pick up a foot of snow through tomorrow. My goodness, remember back in March 20th, 2000, when the headline said, "Snowfalls are now a thing of the past." And snow is already building up in the mountains. Most ski resorts don't open until after Thanksgiving. But the extreme skiers are already out there taking advantage of the slopes. And they're out there having fun. It's winter. On the calendar, tomorrow's the first day of autumn. It's winter. Over in Jasper's ski area, they're seeing unprecedented early season snowfall. They're saying it's coming down in bucketfuls. Marmot Basin spokesperson said, "I've never seen this kind of snow at the end of September." Meanwhile, over in Snoqualmie, Washington, where Claire and I used to hang out, they have snow there. And apparently 5 inches of snow fell the night before at Paradise over on Mount Rainier. And this is the most snow that has fallen there this early in the year since 1978. It's going to be another really hard winter. And the old original Farmer's Almanac is saying exactly the same thing. Now, there's an article out here over at Natural News. As you know, one of the big selling points of human-caused global warming was how there was a consensus of 98% of the world's climate scientists all agreed the world was warming and humans were to blame. And eventually that all fell apart because it turned out that many of the names on the list didn't agree to have their names on the list. Some of them even sued to have their names taken off the list. A lot of the names on the list weren't even climate scientists. They were just grabbing names to pad it on out. But apparently 31,000 scientists, real scientists, have united against the political agenda of global warming, and they have put together this petition, which includes peer-reviewed research. It's backed by various scientists with a wide spectrum of expertise, saying global warming is a total hoax. It's a political agenda. And basically it's saying it warns the United States about signing international treaties that only put a financial burden on the citizens of our country, steal more of our national sovereignty, and restrict its energy production. And yeah, that was a big part of what the global warming hoax was about. It's one of the founding pillars of the New World Order. a climate catastrophe, we must surrender our sovereignty to a global climate authority, along with a global pandemic, which they tried and fizzled back in 2009, requiring we surrender our sovereignty to a global health authority. And the last one, and this one appears to still be on track, a global economic crash, requiring we surrender our sovereignty to a global financial authority and a new global private central bank. It will be a cold day in the dark regions before I go along with that idea. We're going to take a phone call here now. Frank in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I got a question. Hey, did you ever see that movie back, I think it was in like the mid-'80s, it was called Maximum Overdrive, I think based on a Stephen King short story or something, but I remember the soundtrack was AC/DC, Who Made Who, and it was where all the electronics, you know, your blender starts, your toaster oven starts attacking and everything. You know, I notice, I'm starting to notice these commercials. They're marketing these newly built, newly manufactured homes now. They're like luxury homes, and they're smart homes. So the whole thing is wired. But I was wondering if you could tell me, and I'm sure a lot of people would like to know, because I'm not a techno person. I avoid it like the plague. I'm always the last person on the block to get anything. But could you tell us in layman's terms, what does the smartphone, smart TV, and all that, what does smart mean?
Well, smart is basically a generic term meaning that all of the internet-capable devices in your house communicate with each other so that you can have applications on your desktop computer that are managing your oven, your refrigerator, your water heater, your air conditioner, that they're sending information back and forth to each other. And in theory, it sounds really good. But if you realize it's going to result in a lot of work by the homeowner to get all this stuff working correctly. And the idea of having a smart thermostat is if the computer realizes nobody's in the house, it turns off the heat or the air conditioning. You may save a little bit of money that way, but it's offset by the cost of buying and then maintaining these smart-enabled devices, as well as, again, the immense amount of time that you are spending keeping it all correctly working and programmed. And we're already discovering that these Internet of Things smart-enabled devices, there's no security on them. They are wide open to being compromised, and we're seeing hacker botnets being built out of these devices being used to attack servers. They no longer need to compromise real computers. They can go on out and get coffee pots and washing machines and refrigerators to be part of these nets.
So specifically with, say, a smart TV, what is different about a smart TV from, say, you know, the TVs that were saw a couple of years ago, like a regular LED flat screen TV? Is it just when it comes to you, when you take it out of the box, it's already just ready to connect to the internet through Wi-Fi and everything?
Yeah, basically that's it, and it comes with a lot of internal software that has menus to go to things like Hulu and Netflix. It's another portal for content delivery for a small fee. And we have a smart TV because there really wasn't an option for anything else when we exercised our warranty on the last unit. We never use it. We've got it all hooked up. We never really use it. We just pick a channel and we watch what we want to watch. And I think probably we're going to discover that a lot of this smart technology is going to wind up being unused. It's like people who get a smartphone and they'll load it up with apps, and then 4 months down the road, all they're doing is reading email, browsing the web, and making phone calls, and the rest of the apps are sitting there unused.
Okay, one last thing. Is the smart TV listening to you?
There are allegations that the smart TVs are not only able to listen to you, but to even watch you and send the information back. To collect information on you for the benefit of advertisers is the benign explanation, but obviously somebody else could tap on in there and watch what you're doing while you're watching a porn movie or something like that.
1984. So make sure when you're walking by your flat screen smart TV, make sure that you're smiling, make sure that you look happy.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is. It's just like the view screen from 1984. And it is a little scary, and I want to watch the TV. I don't want the TV watching me.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. I think the technology has become decadent. it's in places we really don't need it. And again, the example I used to use is I used to have one of these computerized, automated, make your coffee in the morning when you get up coffee makers, and I got sick of always having to buy a new one because that little basket would wear out and you couldn't get a replacement. So now I just have a French coffee press, much less expensive, had lasted much longer. I don't need a computer to make my coffee. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and apparently there's yet another scam going on down in the hurricane areas along Texas, where some unscrupulous operators are salvaging the flooded cars, and they're refurbishing them, and then apparently trying to sell them as a used car without acknowledging the fact that they've had serious water damage. And they're selling them for far more than they're actually worth. Okay, let's go back to the phones here. W in Texas. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I just wanted to mention there was an article about the Drudge Report, I guess, yesterday.
Yes.
And they were saying they were getting propaganda or whatnot from, I guess, Moscow or what have you. But the funny thing is that if you actually look at Drudge Report, it has multiple, like 50 different websites, from the New York Times to the Huffington Post to, just some of everything up there. And, they have multiple stories from those various websites. So if I didn't know any better, and I'm hearing this, I would think, wow, they are, messing with our politics and everything, because they linked to it in the 2016 election. But if you just look at the website, you can see they have like dozens of websites that they link to every single day.
Yes.
So it's just mind-numbing just to see how they're really treating the public like idiots. And it's just really, it's sad and it's crazy.
Well, basically, we're seeing a repeat of McCarthyism, where merely linking to Russia Today or Sputnik News is going to be seen as evidence that you are colluding with Russia, that you're an arm of Russian propaganda, and they're going to start screaming Russian at everybody that refuses to go along with the war agenda. And it could get really, really ugly, just as it did back during the time of Joseph McCarthy. And it is very alarming to see. I mean, whatreallyhappened.com, we link to a wide variety of sources. We link to Russia Today. We link to Sputnik. We also link to BBC. But again, if you're linking to Russia Today, you must be an arm of Russian propaganda. Well, does linking to BBC make me an arm of British propaganda? Does linking to the New York Times make me an arm of American propaganda? And so forth and so on. But again, it's like Red Scare tactics right out of the 1950s.
Exactly. That was it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch to Dan in Oklahoma City. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, thanks for taking my call. One of the things I want to talk about is two things. How language changes over the years. When I was in school, I know that racism was called prejudice, and it's funny how over the years they create the language, and I would think that racism is more like anti-humanism, and prejudice is really the proper nomenclature. And also, I really do appreciate it when you report on the war crimes going on in Syria and by the U.S. And it's just crazy. It's just crazy times we're living in, man.
Hell yes.
I just and the taxpayer is ultimately responsible. Without them knowing, of course, because they don't report on it.
Well, in theory, morally, we bear the responsibility for the actions of our government. That's mitigated somewhat by the fact that we've lost control of that government. And I think it's incumbent upon all Americans right now to just make a big stink about that, between the massive election fraud and the fact that the government isn't listening to us. We need to shout to the world, we do not support this war agenda. Otherwise, we're going to wind up like the current citizens of Germany, who, even though they were not even alive during World War II, they are still bearing the burden of guilt for what the Nazis did. And I don't want our grandchildren to have to go through that same experience here in the United States.
Yeah, it seems, and it's funny when you talk to a lot of people about this, they say, well, that's collateral damage. That's all, that's all part of it. Well, we've had precision-guided weapons for years. I mean, to eliminate that, I thought that was the point of precision-guided weapons, and to come to find out, that's all we're racking up is civilian casualties. And it's, I mean, come on, you can't. How long can you really, shout? Oh, it was my bad,
Well, you can have a precision-guided munition, but if you're not very careful where you're aiming it at, you can very precisely kill the wrong target. Anyway, Dan, we're going to let you go here and take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and getting on back to ClimateGate and global warming. It's very obvious that as our society becomes more and more corrupt, science itself is for sale. And David Lewis of the Focus for Health Foundation recently published an article in the Daily Caller in which he tried to shed some light on how liberals use lies and fabrication to sell their radical climate agenda. And the public is largely unaware that federal agencies often engage in fabricating scientific data to support the policies. And then, of course, cover up any evidence whenever they mess up. And so we've had all these whistleblowers coming on out saying that government agencies are fabricating science data all the time. Now, we know that NASA and NOAA have been caught red-handed tampering with the temperature data. They'll come out with these charts saying, see, there's warming, there's warming, there's warming. Then you go back to the raw data, and there's no warming. And you say, what's going on? Well, we had to do a statistical correction. We had to, adjust for blah, blah, blah. And they give you a lot of scientific-sounding bovine excrement. But the reality is that the charts they're putting out don't correspond to the raw data. Hardly any at all. Remember when there was that leak of emails and computer code from the Hadley Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia? You could see in the source code where they literally had rigged the code to add numbers to the temperature data after a certain year. And as time went on, the amount being added increased to create that little hockey stick. But it never existed in the real data. And they were using it to push this idea that the world was warming, it was a crisis, government was going to offer to sell us a solution, but only if we would buy and sell carbon credits and pay carbon taxes and surrender more control over our lives. And again, just a few days ago, we reported where even some of the hardcore global warming people have been forced to admit their climate models were wrong because they were biased toward a worst case, most warming outcome, which hasn't happened. When you're doing any kind of a prognostication, whether it's climate or politics or war, you basically go with the middle case of what's likely to happen, the middle of that statistical distribution curve, and you can annotate with best case and worst case. But you go with that middle because that's more than likely where things are going to be going on. In this case, the climate scientists were always biasing their models toward more warming, just like the Hadley CRU was rigging their computer code to make it look like there was more warming than there really was. Then they went and did a bunch of other things. They started shutting down temperature monitoring stations in the cooler rural areas and relying on temperature monitors in cities, the urban heat island effect. And we have photos of some of these temperature monitoring stations in the outflow of building air conditioners, which is warm air. We have one photo of one of these monitoring stations sitting right next to a trash incinerator. Gee, I wonder if they're getting warm numbers from that. And I love the way every once in a while they'll come out and they say there was a record high temperature and thus weather station. And then you go and check and you find out the weather station they're quoting from is in the middle of an airport. Now, it's important to have a weather station in the middle of the airport because you need to get that information to the pilots to determine, where the VR speeds and flap settings for landings and everything. But at the same time, you need to realize those weather stations are sitting in the middle of an airport surrounded by jets belching out tons and tons of burning kerosene. And so it's going to be a lot hotter at those situations than the rest. But they're selectively picking the data to try and sell the political agenda that the earth is warming and that you humans are to blame. And it's another scam. It's another government scam to trick you out of your money, out of your obedience, to make you feel guilty because the world is suffering and dying at your hands. And apparently Deputy Inspector General Mary L. Kenda last year reported on widespread scientific misconduct within the U.S. Geological Survey lab located in Lakewood, Colorado. And at the time, Kenda said the data manipulation that went on was so bad it had serious and far-ranging impacts on the credibility of the agency. Now, do you remember there was this French study on glyphosate and Roundup Ready corn? And unlike the Monsanto test that was done where Monsanto said this stuff is perfectly safe, they kept the rats alive for 3 months, said no ill effects, it's okay to use. Well, this French study kept the rats alive for their entire lifespan, and what they found was that starting in month number 4, the month after Monsanto ended their tests, the rats started developing massive tumors and all kinds of other health problems. And they published this article, and then all of a sudden there was new management. This was over at the journal Food and Chemical Toxicology that ultimately retracted that study. And it turns out the editor-in-chief who oversaw the retraction was on Monsanto's payroll to the tune of $400 per hour. Now, one of the reasons that science has evolved the scientific method, and especially that principle of reproducibility, is science understands that individual scientists are no more free from corrupting influences than individual politicians or individual clergy. They can let ambition get the better of their judgment. They can let desire for publication, desire for funding, lead them to make some pretty extreme statements. I mean, it's a truism among science that if you come on out and you say, I've discovered this interesting phenomenon and it probably doesn't mean much, you're not going to get media attention. You will not get more funding for your work. But if you come on out and you say, I've discovered this interesting phenomenon and it's potentially the end of the world, the media will be pounding on your door and there'll be all kinds of money coming on in. And so science is skewed by these individual scientists' desire for publicity and money and fame. And that is just, unfortunately, reality. And that's why we have scientific method. It would be nice if we had similar systems set up in politics and other areas of human endeavor. But the whole idea of scientific method is to have a system of presenting scientific information and validating it outside of human agency. And any time you have somebody in a white laboratory coat with a clipboard saying, just take my word for it, I'm a scientist, they're not being scientific. And I'll give you a good example. Again, going back to the Hadley Climate Research Unit, when they came out with their conclusion that there was this hockey stick of temperature warming, and other climate scientists said, we would like to reproduce your work, we would like to have a copy of the raw data and the methodology that you used. And Hadley Climate Research Unit said, well, we just threw out the raw data. And our methodology is proprietary. You're just going to have to take our word for it. And that should have been the red warning flag for everybody, and it certainly was for those of us who are paying attention. Because anybody who's doing scientific research, if they're afraid of having somebody look over their shoulder, they've got something to hide. And that's been the case all along with human-caused global warming. Even in his first mockumentary, An Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore was showing the correlation between CO2 and warming. And he was saying, see, it proves as CO2 goes up, warming goes up. Well, he was being a little dishonest, because if you zoomed in on that chart, you would discover that the warming began first, and then the carbon dioxide started to increase, which makes a lot of sense. If the world is warming, life is spreading, more respiration, more metabolism, more CO2. But Al Gore reversed it, and he showed the chart at a scale where it looked like the lines were perfectly on top of each other, and they really weren't. We're going to take a phone call here now. Tom in Utah, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I'm glad to find out global warming is a fact, so I don't have to maintain my website anymore. that gassy America, where I worry about people being asphyxiated in the cold weather in the manufactured homes. I can drop that. It'll save me a couple $100 a month.
All right. Yes, I remember who you are now. Yeah. I mean, we know that American manufacturers are very reckless. Remember those FEMA trailers that they used down following Hurricane Katrina?
I was the one.
And it turned out
I was the one brought down there after. I was the one brought down and identified that.
And they were loaded with.
You know that?
They were loaded with
formaldehyde.
Yeah, formaldehyde. And formaldehyde is a carcinogen. My wife is very, very sensitive to it. We have to be very careful about the products we bring into our house here. But again, manufacturers will use this stuff, and as long as the government is willing to do a nod and a wink and say, yeah, it's okay, they're going to go on doing it. Now, fortunately, the U.S. government finally did pass a ban on formaldehyde-based glues in children's shoes. Adult shoes, you're still on your own. But formaldehyde is a toxic chemical. It is a carcinogen, and yet it is all over the place, and you will find it in low-end cosmetics and house cleaning products in the form of what are called formaldehyde precursors. These are chemicals that over time decompose into formaldehyde as a preservative to maintain the shelf life of the product. So they're not having it go bad on the store shelves. It's all about maximizing profits and minimizing loss. But they're doing so at the expense of the general health of the population. And again, that works in just fine for the medical industrial complex, because as long as you're chronically sick with something, they're going to make money. And I remember when we were dealing with Claire's formaldehyde sensitivity, it was really very horrible, because all of a sudden she starts getting this serious joint pain. And she's a musician. And all of a sudden she can't play the piano anymore, can't play the harp anymore. And it's like watching somebody partly die. And we went to the doctors, and she had the medication and the creams and the special shoes and everything. Nothing worked. And finally, we figured it out for ourselves what was going on. And I remember going into Claire and saying, I've got this idea. I just want to throw some of our products out. Give me a week, okay, and we'll see what happens. And it was like 24 hours later, the pain was gone. And we had to solve it ourselves, because the medical industrial complex is all about selling you a new pill, a new cream, a new ointment, a new special shoe. They never really think about maybe there's something we need to take out of your life that is going to make you feel better.
See, that was the issue that brought me down there. Jesse Finneran, who is a sheriff's deputy, he was asked to become a FEMA agent for placing the families in those FEMA trailers. When his wife went into seizures, he started looking for an answer. He saw my work on the manufactured housing industry and, in the HUD hell, if you want to call it that, an easy website to remember. Anyway, he saw my work and he said, Dr. Rogers, would you mind coming down to New Orleans and help us with this FEMA trailer problem? He says, my wife has been in the seizures. I've had babies die, elderly die in these units. So I went down there and I actually explain to them why not just not the the formaldehyde in the construction materials, but literally when you're burning a gas-fired stove or furnace, you're creating, number one, carbon monoxide, and number two, formaldehyde. That's a secondary combustion gas, and when they found that out, they realized why those units were still injuring people 3 years after the fact.
Yes.
So people have to understand formaldehyde is a combustion gas as a consequence of burning any carbon-based fuel. And when you know that, then you can take steps to keep from being injured. If you're using a cook stove in a closed space, that will injure you, or especially a fetus.
Yes.
By the way, I hope you've had a chance to look at that information, Mike.
I did.
I know at first you were a little skeptical.
Well,
but the fact is, right now with the cold weather coming, we're beginning the process of injuring toddlers and elderly, and that really disturbs me.
Well, ultimately, the ideal solution is, and yes, if you're burning in an enclosed space and you're not properly ventilated, that's a problem there. But ultimately, all these formaldehyde compounds need to be banned entirely. And if they see the reason to ban formaldehyde in children's shoes, they obviously understand there's a reason to ban it everywhere. But formaldehyde is a very popular chemical with manufacturers. It's self-polymerizing. and it's very useful for things like glues and artificial varnishes and things like that. And the manufacturers want to use it because it's less expensive than alternative forms that may be healthier for the end customer. But again, our nation has become so obsessed with profit that other considerations, like the health of your customers, really are discarded, and we need to restore a balance. Now, again, I have nothing against making money. I'd like to make some money myself, but there has to be a balance in society between making money, doing a quality product, taking care of your community, making sure that your customers are not harmed by the product or service that you are selling, and just doing a good job for the sake of a sense of pride in doing a good job. Rather than this AFAB mentality, which stands for anything for a buck.
By the way, those victims, those patients that died in that rest home in Florida,
yep,
they did not die of heat exhaustion. They died of carbon monoxide poisoning because somebody brought several gas-fired generators into that facility. So anytime you have a combustion engine or a stove or an oven in a closed space, you need to be aware you're producing, number one, carbon monoxide, number two, formaldehyde.
They were running the generators inside? That's insane.
Yes. In fact, Senator Bill Nelson gave me a call. He knew I'd been involved with Katrina. Knew I'd had to write an advisory for Hurricane Sandy. I'd already been talking through Ron Paul's friends to the people in Texas. Bill Nelson and I sat together in Washington in 2011 and 10 and 11. So he was familiar with my efforts in Katrina and identifying the cause of death, even the latent death in those FEMA trailers. So I was really honored, or respected, when he had his staff give me a call and ask for advice for the Florida problem. And it was really a mind bender when I found out that, contrary to the common news, said that these people in that rest home in Hollywood, Florida, had died because of heat. I'm looking for the right word.
Heat exhaustion?
Heat exhaustion, but in fact, when I found out they'd been operating a generator, they were trying to operate CPAP machines and different equipment in there.
Yeah, I understand that, but if they had the generator inside the rooms with those people, I mean, this is what you get from the dumbing down of America. We have adults going around right now who have never been taught that you don't run an internal combustion engine in an enclosed space. I'm absolutely shocked to find that even happened.
The other factor is they put their trust in the carbon monoxide alarms. Did you know that a carbon monoxide alarm, the commercial alarms, do not sound until you exceed four
I know.
times the OSHA limit?
I know. They're not very good. Tom, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Erica, welcome back to the show here. And in another example of products being sold without a real thorough understanding of the potential harm they can do to people, it turns out that trichlocarbon, which is the most common antibacterial chemical compound found in various personal care products, soaps, and lotions, can inadvertently be transferred from mother to unborn child. Apparently, it passes right through the placental barrier, and it can cause irreversible damage to the developing fetus. TCC is also noted to interfere with the lipid metabolism in the baby, which could lead to growth abnormalities. Now, TCC was officially banned by the FDA last year due to a lack of evidence that it demonstrates that it's safe in the long-term daily use, but many personal care manufacturers are still using that ingredient. It's like a couple of years ago when they promised they were going to end thimerosal in vaccines. It's still there. Because it makes money. And if it makes money, it's good. And if it doesn't make money, it's bad. So some people are dying. You're being so petty and picky here. I have to tell you, I look at Paul Allen, Microsoft co-founder, and I do have to say, I like what he's doing with his money a lot more than what Bill Gates does with his. And one of the things that he has funded is the world's largest airplane. It's got a wingspan longer than a football field. It's getting ready for a test flight a little over a year now, but it's been put together, 6 jet engines. It's called the Strato Launch. It's another Burt Rutan design. And it is this gigantic wing, 6 engines on the outside, 2 fuselages. Should recognize that design from the drop ship for Space One. And this is a heavy carrying platform. And the idea is they're going to use this airplane to carry space launch vehicles up to the top of the atmosphere and launch from there, saying that this will allow payloads to reach orbit faster and at a lower cost than existing technologies. And yes, I don't see anything wrong with that idea at all. And that is a very, very exciting thing to see happen. I love this idea of the privatization of space. Now, believe it or not, somebody actually apparently got a grant to run a research program on the safety of these little personal drones everybody's flying around, which came to the conclusion that, yes, drones can hurt you when they hit you on the head. And the recommendation of all this very expensive research is that you should not allow the heavy ones to fly directly over you. Like, we needed somebody to tell us this. It's almost like that common sense really has left our society. Like this story about how this nursing home was running a generator to keep all the machinery running. That's a good thing to do, but you put it outdoors and you run an extension cord. Or you have a proper exhaust tube to take the exhaust outside. Running it inside the building and then hoping that the carbon monoxide alarms were going to keep you safe. No, that wasn't going to work because, as our caller pointed on out, very often those carbon monoxide alarms, they don't go off until you're already over lethal levels. People have got to stop relying on the government and the corporations to take care of you. You got to think for yourselves, people. We need to bring back common sense. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. He's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please share what you learn here with everybody that you know. We'll be back tomorrow here on Republic Broadcasting. Aloha, America.